If you're brand new to React, then I think this project is going to be perfect for you. What I've done is create the simplest project I could that gives us access to a lot of really important things, concepts in React. Things like state management, how to create and kind of handle components, how to pass props back and forth between components, event handling, kind of those kind of basic things in React. And I want to walk you through it right now. You can see here I've got this project up and running. And this is the idea here is like you're just working on one thing at a time. And this is a way to kind of stay focused during your work. So like I could say like making this video is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And when I'm done, I just come in here and mark it done. And then I get a nice message and all these this confetti flying everywhere. And then it moves back here and allows me to do another one thing. This is actually inspired by a thing called one thing right here. And you can see that it just keeps something up in my menu bar. And when I record the video, then I can change it to something else, but it keeps that before me as the one thing I'm supposed to do. All right, so let's go ahead and build this out. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris and welcome to Coding in Public. I'm really excited to start doing some React on the channel, and I hope you'll enjoy it as well. We're going to start really basic, but I think this will give us access to a bunch of important concepts, so I don't want to overcomplicate it. Now, within the next couple of weeks, I've got a video coming out detailing how to create a full CRUD app with React. We're going to have creating and reading and updating and deleting functions, and I think it'll be really fun for you, but I thought I'd start super simple. So here we go, and let's go ahead and jump right in. So what we're going to do is I've just got over here, I've got a terminal open, and then I've got some things we're going to be using. We're going to start with Vite. Now, you may have heard of Create React App. Create React App is super slow, and it includes a bunch of files we don't need, especially at this stage. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use Vite because it's crazy fast. And in fact, I'm also going to use PMPM, which is also super fast, and so that will speed us up even more so. So I'm going to use this exact same thing, except I'm going to switch out here, React, and change the app name to something like One Thing. In fact, I've got this on my clipboard, so let me go ahead and paste this in. All right, cool. And we're going to CD into the one thing, and then I'm going to add a couple of other things. We're also going to use Tailwind on this project, and this will give us light and dark mode and a bunch of other things by default. And if I use this here, Tailwind with Vite, this is the thing they have. They're using it with Vue, but it should work just the same. I'm going to come in here and grab this right here, except with PMPM, and then also use this npx command. So let me first paste this first one in. It's the same, except since I'm using PMPM, it just says PMPM instead of that. It's installing Tailwind, post CSS, which will help kind of process all the Tailwind, and then auto prefixer to help add support for older browsers. Next, I'll do PMPX, Tailwind, CSS, init, P. What this is going to do is basically create a couple files I need to run Tailwind accurately, so it'll do that for me. And you can see here it created this tailwind config.cjs and this post CSS config.cjs. Now, one more thing we're going to do is use these hero icons, and this will give us access to libraries, which are super important in React because there's a bunch of really great ones out there. And so this will give you a little taste of what it's like to work with a library. I'll come in here and grab the documentation, and you can see down here, the first thing it tells me to do is to install it. So let's go ahead and do that. Again, I'm going to use PMPM, but everything else should be the exact same. All right, so with all that up, let me go ahead and open up my code editor and switch it out for this terminal, and I'll be right back with you. All right, here we are. Before we get going too far, let me go ahead and just open up a local terminal inside here, and I'm going to run PMPM run dev, or if you're using npm, that would just be npm run dev. It's just going to run this dev script that Vite adds by default. Let me go ahead and open this up and close this down, and you can see kind of the basic default styling they give you. We'll walk through kind of how this all works, and then we'll go ahead and build out our own project. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how React works. You can see here that I've got this button, and if I start to click it, it keeps track of what number I'm on. So now I'm on 4, 5, 6, and it's keeping track of this in something React calls state. State is basically just a fancy name for a variable, and React has some functions that help you keep track of different states of variables, so what you hold in certain variables. In this case, there must be some kind of variable here called count. In fact, if I come over here, we can see what it is. Let me close this down. It's in the app.js, and here it is. So count and set count, and then it's destructuring these from a function that React has called useState. So basically you pass in certain variables, just think about it like that, along with a function that will update that variable. And then every time you click on this, you're just passing this function and saying, hey, set the count to whatever new number it is. So down here, they're going to have something like count plus 1, and now it's kept track of that. And React has basically made it easier to spin up this UI. So React is really built for interactive UIs. And the whole point is that you use a bunch of functions they've built and a bunch of tooling they've built in their library to speed up the process of creating dynamic UIs. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about React. When you go to a website, your client, your computer, your browser reaches out to the server and asks, hey, give me whatever's here. And it spits back just an HTML file. However, with React, that's not what happens. You get an HTML file that's got basically nothing in it but a single div, but you also get a bunch of JavaScript. And I'll show you that in a little bit in the actual project. Then what happens is every subsequent request or anything else you do, instead of looking at the HTML file, it actually reaches inside of React, and all those functions help dynamically generate the UI that you want or that you need. So this could be like changing pages. When you normally go to change a page, it goes back to the server and it requests another HTML page, and then it sends you that back. However, with React sites, when you try to go back and request a different page, React intercepts that and actually dynamically generates the page you need to see directly in real time. Now, this, again, is really cool for a bunch of different reasons, but the biggest one is that you can have super dynamic UIs. Now, there are some things when it comes to like SEO, so like search engines can't scrape this by default. You've got some other things like the fact that this JavaScript package can be really, really big. And if it's basically a static site, then you're not getting a whole lot of benefit out of that. But when it comes to interactive, like dashboards, or you think about Facebook or some kind of social media app, you could see how that needs to be dynamically generated as you scroll for each user, depending on their state of whether they're authenticated, and React is perfect for those kinds of applications. So it basically builds out dynamic UIs in a really speedy way that helps you keep track of what the user needs when the user needs it. All right, so here we are back in the code. Let me just kind of show you what this actually looks like in practice. If I come in here to the HTML file, let's first of all go ahead and rename this while we're here. We'll call it something like one thing app. But you're going to see down here, like I said, there's only a single div with an ID of root and nothing else in this index.html file. There's nothing else in the HTML. Now, you can see that there is a script tag, and this points to my main.js file. You'll see this main file imports React DOM, which is essentially like a virtual DOM that it creates rather than using the one in the browser. And then it's importing a component here called app. We're going to walk through all of these things in a second. But the important thing to know is it's basically saying, hey, grab the root and basically render this app inside of this. And by doing it strict mode, it makes it a little safer to actually develop. And that's what we're going to be doing. You can also see it has some other odd things, like the CSS is being imported directly inside of here. And that's right here. Now this app file is what's actually being imported. And you can see here that it's basically just a JavaScript function, but React is making it a little bit more powerful. And all of these have JSX extensions because it's not exactly JavaScript, it's JSX. And JSX is kind of like HTML in the sense that it can return this HTML, but there's some oddities to it, and I'll explain that to you as we get going. You can see here that I'm importing a certain function from React. I'm importing an asset like an SVG. I'm also importing its own custom CSS file here, which will be scoped to this function. But other than that, just kind of strip away in your mind that this is something different than just vanilla JavaScript, because really all it is a function. And this function returns a string of what looks like HTML that's mostly HTML. Again, it's JSX. And then we just export this as the default, and that's what I'm importing here as app, and then dumping it in directly here. So essentially, we're just using JavaScript, but React gives us some powerful things. One of those things is state, which we'll talk about, and we have already a little bit here. State basically is going to keep track. Here, this useState function, I'm setting here the name of what I want the state to be called, along with a function I want to pass in to update that state whenever I want to. And now whenever I click on this over here, you can see that it's just saying add 1 to whatever the current state is. We'll get to that in a second. But the point is, if you know JavaScript, you can understand React. It's basically just some extra functions thrown in to vanilla JavaScript to make it easier on you to generate dynamic UIs. All right, enough talking. Let's go ahead and start building this thing out. We're going to start by making sure our Tailwind is set up and ready to go. If I move back over to this installation page, you're going to see that it's going to tell me here that I need to change out this content. So let's go ahead and do that in this Tailwind config. Let's just change this out right here. And we're not going to be using view or anything like that, but it's fine. We can just use that. All right, I think that's mostly it, except I've got to add these things to my index.css. And if I come in here, I'm going to get rid of all that and add that. We no longer need any other CSS file since we're just using Tailwind. So let me come back in here and make sure that I've removed this import because it's going to yell at me if I don't. All right, let's close this down and jump over here. And you can see right over here that I've now got all of this just showing up with no styling because, well, that's what I'd expect. All right, so let's go ahead and get rid of all of this inside here. And so now I've just got an empty app right here. And if I were to come in here and add an H1 that said like hi, there you go, hi up top. All right, so you can see that it's dynamically generating that for me. Come over here, make sure I have saved whatever I need to, close this down as well, and now I think we're ready to go. So if I go to the finished project, you're going to see that I've got essentially two different things we need to create. This view right here, where I type in something, and whatever the thing is, now it's going to be this view right here, and then I also need to handle all of this. All right, so we'll get around to that, but let's think about it just in those two different sections. So let's start with this your one thing. If I come over here, the first thing you might notice about this kind of fake HTML is that it has class name camel cased, which is a little weird. It's not class like this. In React, it's class name. And basically this comes down to the fact that it has to transpile this down to HTML. And so some of these properties, it's not going to have you name as you typically would. There's not a ton of them, and it'll actually yell at you whenever you do the wrong thing. So it's not too hard to learn and not something you have to like go figure out yourself. It'll kind of walk you through it. And as we go through it, you'll figure it out as well. First thing I want to do though is come in here and let's go ahead and change this to a main tag. And then let's change this class name. We're going to just go ahead and style this as we would. And maybe just to make sure that everything is working, let's go ahead and put in here, what is your one thing, like that. And that way you can see it styled as I go. So in this main app, this is basically going to wrap everything. So I want to set some default things for my background, for my fonts, and all that kind of stuff. If you're not familiar with Tailwind, I'm not going to walk through every single detail here. I've done a full 1-hour video course on setting up an entire landing page, and you can check that out. So here I'm going to assume that you kind of have an idea about Tailwind, but basically what we're going to do is write single classes that each reference a single property in CSS. So if you know CSS, you should be able to follow along. So we'll first of all have a grid property that will be display grid, and then we'll have place items center, which will be place items : center. And you can see this CSS IntelliSense extension I have gives me access to the exact CSS that I'm actually writing. So that's the way I like to write Tailwind. Next, I want this to be min height of screen, and then I want the background to be a gradient, and we'll go to the bottom, and then we'll give it two values here from slate. Let's do slate 100 to slate 200. If I go ahead and save that, it should put everything in the middle and give me this nice gradient. Let's see. Let's make sure this is actually working. I don't see it working. Gradient to bottom. Let's see, I think this needs to be like this. Okay, there we go. All right, so 200. All right, perfect. A couple other things here. Let's go ahead and set a dark mode value for both of these as well. So we'll say from slate 800, and for the dark as well, we want to go to slate 900. And if I were to toggle my machine to dark mode, there we go. Okay, cool. Let's make sure we update that text so that it works on both the light and dark mode. So we'll start with the light mode, say text slate 900. And for dark mode, we'll say text slate 200. All right, so that should work. And let's just double check by moving back to dark mode. And there we go. Okay, so this section here, this H1 is going to be in that first section I showed you, but both sections are going to be wrapped by another div here, and I'll just give it a class of grid and place items center. This is just using Emmet to kind of get this out a little bit quicker. We'll do gap 8 and margin 8. Expand this all out and then move this up here and inside here. All right, next, let's go ahead and add some classes here. And again, you don't want class, but class name. Just about messed that one up. Here we want some pretty big text. So we'll say text 3XL, and then on small screen sizes, which is like, I don't know, 500 or 600 pixels or so, it's going to bump up to 6XL. I want this to be font bold and then text of center. All right, so there it is right there, and everything is mostly working. Now we just have the form to add. So we'll add that here. And again, this is just a standard form element. We don't need an action or anything like that right now. We will have a couple things here. We'll have some classes, so class name, and then we'll also have something called on submit. And this is how you essentially submit handling, and we'll talk about this in a second, but for now, we'll just add this as a placeholder and comment it out so it doesn't yell at us. Okay, so this form itself is going to have two things. It'll have an input here, and then it will also have a button. Again, we will talk through these as we get going, but the important thing to note here is that this button is going to have just a single icon, that arrow that points to the right. And we're going to get that from our Tailwind icons. Now, if I come down here, this is the thing we imported earlier. You can see that what it has me do is just import whatever icons I want directly in here. Since we've already installed it, we could do that. So if I come up here, and let's get rid of this right here. We don't need that. I'll just add this beaker icon. And then all I have to do is grab this right here and drop it directly in here. And it looks kind of like just an HTML tag, but you can see it's actually pulling in a component from this library. So if I save it and come back over here, there we go, we got a beaker, right? Not exactly what I want, but that works for now. What I want to do is instead come over here and I'm going to grab my arrow circle right icon, and it'll actually walk you through that. You can also look at it in there. And then I need to replace this as well, like that, and that works. Let's see, I want this and this to both be 12, and then I don't want to add any text to it here, no color to it. So I'll go ahead and leave it like that, and we'll style it with the button text. All right, so I've got the icon I need. I've got everything set up. Let me go ahead and just style this out with CSS, Tailwind, and you can follow along with that, and then we'll come back to a lot of the React-y type things. So for now, let's come in here to our form. We've got a couple things to do here. So first of all, I want it to be flex, and then I'm going to go ahead and set a ring of 4 all the way around it. And you can see that gives me that nice ringed border around it. And I want this to be rounded, small, which is actually, let's do medium, which gives me a border radius around the whole thing. And I also am going to end up doing that on the inputs as well. So we'll do that in a second. Let's see. I want the color of the ring itself. So ring to be, we'll do slate 200, which should be the same as the background. So it should kind of disappear, which it does. And then whenever I focused within, so when I'm focused on that input field, I want to change up the color. So I want my ring to be, let's see, let's do teal of 600. So if I come in here and click here, it should change that ring color, and it does. The other thing I want to do is actually move that off. So I'll say focus within. I want it to be a ring offset of 4. That should actually move it away slightly, and it does, which is cool. I'll have to go ahead and style a few other things. Let's set a background on the form. So we'll say background here. I want it to be slate 200. And that reminds me that for this one, I want it to be dark ring, let's see, slate 800. So it should match its own background color too. And let's just switch over to dark mode to double check. It does. And then when I click in here, that works. Now I'm getting this white banding around it, and that's because I have not set an offset color here. Whenever I go focus within and I move it to an offset of 4, I need to now set an offset color. So I'm going to say ring offset. So by default, I want this to be slate of 200. And then on dark mode here, I want this to be ring offset slate 800. All right, so I think that's mostly set for the form. Let's come in here now. Let's break this out just to make it a little clearer as well. And we're going to add class names here as well. And we'll also add them to the button. So I'll come in here, class names, and both of these will start very similar. So let's go ahead and just kind of do them together. So we want the background to inherit from its parent, which should make it that exact same color. I want this to be a rounded medium as well. So it should have that same kind of circular shape to it. I'll go ahead and set the font to sans so that it is the same font as everything else on the site. And we'll take the text and set it to slate of 800. And that should be same whether it's light or dark mode. Let's go ahead and give it padding up top, Y of 2, and padding X of 6. And in fact, for this button, I'm just going to change this to padding right. Come back here holding the Option key and grab both of those cursors again. And here what I want is focus. Whenever it's focused, I want an outline of none because we're going to control the whole focus state with the parent like we just did with focus within. Now let me go ahead and just now select the input itself. Let's change a couple of text properties. So I want text of XL, and then on small screen sizes, I'll do text to XL. I do want to change the placeholder, and so I can use this selector here and grab that text and say slate of, let's do 400. And then I want to change the caret, so the little blinking cursor. We'll make it the same as the kind of the outline color when we focused within. And I also want to set this to appearance of none and a width of full. So I think that's mostly all I need to do there. This button, I've got a couple of other things to add as well. So let's come down here. Here I want to add some focus state. So when it's focused, I want to change the text to teal of 600. And when it's hovered, I also want to do the same thing. So we'll do text, let's see, teal of 600, which makes me think, I said text twice here. Okay, so now I should be able to come in here and hover, and that should change. This caret color is the same. All this focus state is controlled by the parent. That looks perfect to me. Okay, so we've got all that stuff set. And if I come over here and tab to it, that works as well. I can submit it, and you can see it's trying to submit, and it just gives me that little question mark because there's nothing inside of here. So now what we need to do is actually handle this form submission in React. Now, just like with a normal form, you don't want to actually do an event listener on the button. What you want to do is just do a submit on the entire form. And just like in HTML, standard HTML with JavaScript, when you do that, it captures your your cursor input, it captures pressing the button, all that kind of stuff, and that's what we're going to do in Tailwind as well. So we're going to use this onSubmit handler. We're going to pass it a function. So we'll just call this something like handle submit, like that, and I'll come up here, and above the return, just like in a normal function here that you would expect in vanilla JavaScript, I'm going to have a function here called handle submit. We'll take in the event, and let's first of all say e.prevent default, because I don't want the page to refresh, and then we'll just console.log the E. All right, so the event itself. So this should be passing in here, and I can make this an arrow function if I want or whatever, but I'll just make it well, actually, maybe let's do that. So let's make this an arrow function just to kind of keep it separate from the main function. There we go. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to tie any kind of input at all into this input as a piece of state. So we'll explain that as we go. But the important thing to know here is that I'm going to add a couple of extra things to this input. First of all, I went ahead and added a placeholder styling. So let's add some placeholder, which would be enter one thing. And then I also want this to autofocus. So when the page loads, it autofocuses. This is another one where you actually camel case it. And again, React will tell you if you do the wrong thing. In fact, if I just say autofocus like I would in HTML, and I come over here and open this up, it's going to yell at me and say, did you mean autofocus? So you don't have to worry about memorizing those. It will tell you, all right? And it'll hate you for it. All right, so there we go. We want it to be autofocus. The other thing I want to do is set a max length. And again, I have to do this camel cased, and I want this to be, let's do 64 characters. So that's as long as they can type an answer. That kind of controls how big this text is going to end up being when I display it after I've entered in the form. Finally, what I'm going to do is set the value here. And in this case, I want to set it to something called value. Now you might be like, well, where's this coming from? All right, I can call this whatever I want. Maybe we can just call this thing. How about that? All right, so I'll call this thing. And now React is yelling at me because it doesn't know where to find this. So if I move all the way back up here, I talked a second ago about this use state function. You can see here we've imported this from React. And what I'm doing is I need to pass it two things. And I destructure these in this array. The first item I'm passing is the name of whatever variable I want. And in this case, you can see here, it's saying that it's a number because this is a number. So it's kind of inferring a type from it. What I'm going to do is change this to thing. The second thing I pass in is a function that will update the variable to a new value. And again, here it's still inferring this is a number because this is a number. So I'm going to pass it now inside of here, this placeholder, or this argument, I'm going to pass it its default state. So to start with, this is going to be equal to not 0, but an empty string. All right, so there we go. Now, you can see here what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and come in here, and we're going to write one more thing. If I come down here, I want to add an on input. And this is another way now in React to write a function based on any time I input anything into this text field. In this case, I want to pass it another function we're going to write called handle input. So let's come up here and we'll write that function. So we'll say const handle input. We'll take in the input, whatever that is, and all we're going to do is console.log the input. Actually, we'll do the e dot. Yeah, let's just leave it at e for now. All right, so let me come over here and open this up, and I'll walk you through exactly what's going on here. So right here, as I start to type, if I type A, you can see I'm getting this input. And yeah, what I should have done is say input.value. All right, but let's just move down here so you can see what's going on. Target.value. So let me do that. Handle e.target.value, like that. Let's refresh this. A, B, S, D. It's basically giving these one after the other. Now, what we're wanting to do now is we want to basically double tie this form input to the state. So on the one hand, I'm setting its value to this thing. In this case, it's just an empty string. Now what I want to do is whenever I type, I want to actually update the value of this thing. And I can do that again with this set thing function. So inside this handle input, now what I want to do is come in here and say set thing, and I just want to pass it now my e.target.value, just like that. Okay, so now to make sure you can actually see this, and this is kind of the beauty of using React, I can just drop the thing right here anywhere I want. So if I come up here, let's just drop it right here instead of this h1. I'll drop it in its place, and in this case, it's going to start as an empty string, but as I type, it's just going to automatically update that state. And now notice this also, its value is going to be tied to it. In fact, if I were to come in here and click in here and pull down here, you can see the value right here is the exact same here as it is here, as it is here. So React is basically tying all these to a variable and then updating the UI based on whatever I say the new value for thing is, which I'm doing right here. Pretty cool, right? So that's one of the reasons people love React. All right, let's go ahead and change this back. Now what I want to do is obviously update this state. So I want to change the thing to now the new value of whatever that is. And then I want to handle it so it's actually doing something. Let's first of all check out what happens when we console.log the event. So I'll come in here and do this, and let's go ahead and submit this. And now you see that I get this synthetic based event. So React is actually simulating this event, and it gives me a bunch of things. If I come in here to the target, you can see that I've got the input, I've got the button, so these different items inside of here. Eventually, if I were to come all the way down here, I'd have the value somewhere down below. So the value of this state is basically going to be embedded in the form itself because I've tied it to the value of this input. All right, hopefully that all makes sense. Now what I need to do is basically decide how I want to show this or the other thing. So think about it from just a JavaScript way, first of all. Don't try to think about it as React or anything like that. How might you show or hide something? Well, you could probably do it with essentially a piece of state where you say like is visible or is pending or is completed or something like that. So that's a good impulse. Let's go ahead and use that. Except in this case, let's just make it a little bit more Reacty. So I'm going to come in here, and we're going to change this over here, and I'll say something like, grabbing both of these, we'll say like is completed. All right, so what I want to know is the task completed? In this case, I don't want to pass an empty string because it's going to be a Boolean. So by default, it's not going to be completed. So it's not completed. Perfect, that's what I want. When I submit it, it still shouldn't be completed, which is true. And actually, let's think through this because I'm not sure that's right. All right, let's think through it again. If it is completed, then I can type in an extra thing. So I think I actually want this to start as true. Then what I'm going to do is come down here and say set is completed, and now we're going to set it to false. All right, I think that's correct. Let's come in here, and you know what? Let's go ahead and get rid of this, and let's just walk through how we would use this piece of state to decide whether or not we display all this. Well, in React, just like here, and just like any other time we've got these things in these curly brackets, you essentially do templating using that syntax. So what I'm going to do is inside of this wrapper, I'm just going to come in here and wrap all of this right here. Actually, let's just grab this here. We'll move down to the very bottom of the form, and just below here, we'll close everything out. Now in this case, we're not doing any templating, so it's going to yell at us. But what I want to do is say is completed. If that's true, then I'm going to do double ampersand and wrap this in parentheses here. So all I'm doing is using basically a logical and I'm saying if it's completed, then go ahead and show that. Now let me move over here. You're going to see we're getting an error. All right. It's saying basically you need this to be wrapped in enclosing tags. So what's going on here? Well, basically what it's doing is the way React or JSX works is when you have a component that's passed in, everything has to be passed in under one this is all JSX, so it has to be passed inside of one div. So I could simply wrap this in a div like this, or inside of one element. And then I could wrap it in a div like this, and now everything is inside one div, and now it should all work, except all my styling is messed up. So what you can do if you don't want to pass in an actual div is do what's called a fragment. It used to be that you had kind of funky syntax. Now all you do is basically don't have anything. It's just essentially empty tags like that in the bottom. And now the same thing, it should work just the same. Except now it basically removes this when it dumps it in and just dumps it in just like this in the HTML. Again, that's a little weird, but it's just the way React works. All right, so here it is completed. Now what I can do is say if it's not completed, don't show it. In which case, what's going to happen? What do you think? It's going to disappear. That's right. So is completed, now it shows. Not completed, now it doesn't show. So let's go ahead and do it like this. And now we're going to enter something in, so something. And when I hit enter, what's going to happen? Because remember, when I hit enter, this onSubmit handle function is going to fire. Up here, it's going to prevent the default, so it's not going to refresh the page. And now it's going to set is completed to false. All right, so let's see what happens. What do you think? Put your money in now. It's going to disappear. So in other words, as soon as this state changes, now the entire UI updates. And you can imagine how helpful this is if you have like a bunch of different cards, or you have like a dashboard of some kind. And as you're interacting with the data, all this state just keeps track of what should be shown and not shown. Now, so far, this is getting to be kind of a big file, and we have yet to write the second component that's going to be inside here. And this is where another way to kind of organize your code comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this sidebar, and inside this source folder, I'm going to create another folder called components. And what we're going to do is come in here, and I'm going to add a file, capitalize here. We'll just call it let's call it custom form. How about that? All right, .jsx. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then what we're going to do is essentially grab everything we just did and put it over here as its own little function. So I'm going to start here with const form. And then right now I'm going to point this to nothing. And again, I'm making this an arrow function. I guess the other one we had as a standard function, but it's fine. Either way, it works. I'm just going to go ahead and return here. We'll return a bunch of stuff. I'll show you that in a second. And then at the bottom, I'm going to say export default form. And just to make sure that this is all working, let's just come in here and say like h1 hi. All right. And then what I'm going to do is come over here to my JSX or my app.jsx. I'm going to import that up top. So maybe let's keep track of these a little bit differently. So we'll say React imports. We're actually going to move this import here, but this will be like library imports. And then down below here, I'm going to do custom components. All right, what we're going to do is import, and this is just a relative path here. I want my custom form from. We're going to jump out here to my components and then custom form. You don't have to put .jsx, just like with imports in JavaScript as well. That should work just fine. Now what I can do is basically grab all of this. Let's go ahead and copy this out. I'm going to get rid of that, and we'll just come in here and we'll import my custom form. And again, it's a self-closing tag in this case, so I'm just going to add it just like that. And I don't even need this right here. And in fact, I can keep it all on one line. I can put it up here. I don't need any of that as well. So I could just have it just like that. Now if I come over here and refresh, there's my hi. All right, cool. So that's working. Now I've copied all of that on my clipboard. Let's come over here and actually let's get rid of these, make this another little fragment, and we're just going to drop all that HTML directly in here. Now, if I were to save this, there's going to be some problems. Can you guess what the problems are? Think through what we've got here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. We're going to get yelled at. And if I open this up, it's going to yell a bunch of stuff. All right. Handle submit is not defined. Form component, there's an error. All right. So what's all this going on here? Well, handle submit isn't defined in this file. It's defined in its parent file. So there's a couple things we could do. We could just have all the state directly in here if we wanted to, but I'm going to need the state in some of my other components. So essentially the state needs to be as high up as you need it to be, and then it can kind of trickle down to the other items. Now there are ways to kind of wrap everything in React with state, but we're not going to worry about that. That's a little bit more of an advanced topic. So let me come back over here. And what I need to do is pass in the state to this custom form. And you would pass it in just like you would use attributes in HTML. So I'm going to say like the thing, in this case, we need the thing to be passed down. We'll just pass down the state of thing. And I can call this whatever I want. I call this hi, or whatever, but this is what I'm going to call it because it's the same thing. Let's go ahead and break this down just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. I also need to pass in the handle input as well. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll say handle input is equal to handle input. And again, you don't have to name these both the same thing. This obviously has to be named whatever you've got it in this file, but I'll just name it the same thing for sake of ease. Handle submit, same thing, and this will be handle submit. All right, so now all these things are being passed in, so that's good. And now I should have access to this state, this function, and this function within my form function. So let's come back over here. How do I get these in here? What I can do is destructure these just like I would with any kind of function I write, and just pull these in one after the other. So I'll say thing, handle input, and handle submit. Just like that. I'll save it. I'm going to get one more error. Can you think of what it might be? There's something we haven't pulled in. Look down here. Anything you can see? Okay. Open it up. Arrow circle right icon is not defined. Okay, so good to know. So let's come back over here because you might remember this up here we imported here. Now we're not using it here. We're actually using it in the form. So I can just go ahead and pull it in down there. So let's do that. At the very top, I'll just add it in up top here as a library import. And now everything should work. So now what I've done is extracted that component out into its own file and then just imported it here and passed it whatever it needs. In this case, the thing, the handle input, and the handle submit. And by having these defined at a higher level, now I can use them down below if I want to. In other words, when I have my other component I'm going to build down here, I can actually access all of these things that I need in that other component as well, since everything is being changed at this level. So now if I come in here and say like hi and submit, it should remove itself just like you'd expect. All right, so we are a good bit of the way to understanding how to basically use React. What we've done is used a bunch of different state. We've used functions. We've used handle inputs and submits on forms. We've actually passed in different props, that's what these are called, into the component, this custom form we've created, and then received them in here, and then basically attached them down below as well. So now what we're going to do is use the same idea, except we're going to build out our other component. So let me come over here. First thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and duplicate this. So let's copy it and paste it. And here, let's call this something like one thing. All right, it's my one thing that I want to display. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of a bunch of stuff here. Let's just get rid of all that. And I'll come in here and say const one thing. This is going to be equal to, I'm going to pass in some things in here as well, but we'll leave that empty for now. An arrow function, and let's just export default one thing right here. And in this arrow function, I need to return something. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, for now, we'll just do this fragment, and we can add anything we want in here. All right, I don't think we're going to need that, but we might need another icon. I don't remember what we've got in that file, but now we're set up to go. Let's go ahead and come over here, see to my app. And up top here, I'm going to pull in another custom component. Can you guess what this one is called? One thing. That's the one we just created. And now what I want to do is in this state, what I want to say is whenever it is completed, show this. Whenever it's not completed, so let's go ahead and let's just use the same thing down below here. So we'll say when it's not completed, then I want to add in my one thing component like this. All right, cool. So now it should show my one thing down here. Now I know I want at least one thing if state, and that's my thing right here. So let's go ahead and do that. So thing, we're going to pull this in up top, one thing like here. And let's go ahead and just add this in a paragraph, and we'll just say thing. All right, so we'll save this here. Now it should show hi, and that's what it does. So you can see what it's doing is it's passing this bit of state down. Now, one thing that might be helpful for you as you're learning React is to install the React Dev tools. Chrome tools here is what I've got, depends on your browser. You can see we've got components and profiler. What it's doing is it's going to show me the state of my app itself. Now, one of the cool things is that if I click on app here, it's going to show me any state I have. So I have an empty string of state. What's that? Well, that's my thing. And I have this true, which is completed, yes or no. All right. And then inside here, I see what gets passed in. These are the props that got passed in, the functions, the things. If you want this in Chrome, just search Chrome DevTools for React, and you can download it directly from React. Here's this library, and you can see here I passed in a prop of a class name, and it tells me kind of how everything was rendered. So this is a helpful way to keep track of stuff if you're getting lost in everything in React. All right, that was a little side journey. Let's go ahead and template out this. Now, I actually want to have the same styling as my custom form. Let's see right here. So let's grab this H1 right here. And in this case, we're actually going to do the exact thing I showed you a second ago, which is we're going to replace this with whatever the thing is. So thing right here. So now I'm grabbing this prop and directly adding it into here, which is what we just did. Now we just have it styled a little bit better. Now you can actually have embedded components inside of components. And the reason that's helpful is that if you have a button, for instance, that's all throughout your site, you don't have to keep writing that HTML code out. You just reference the component. So in this case, we're going to create one. We'll just call it custom button like this. And this custom button can be a self-closing tag. That's fine. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to pass some prompts inside here. So we'll say like text, and let's just pass this something like mark done. In this case, I'm passing it my own custom string. It's not state or anything like that. But the other thing I want to do is say handle complete completed thing. How about that? And that's going to be a function called handle completed thing. Now in this case, where am I getting this function from? Well, I actually want to define it at the higher scope because it's going to redefine some state. So that's probably the easiest way to do it. So let's go ahead and do that. Handle completed thing. Now what I need to do is go to its parent. Where is its parent? Well, it's the app. So let's come up here. Same kind of thing. We're going to come in here, say handle completed thing. And in this case, we'll take in the event. That's fine. And console.log the event for now. All right, so I've got that set. Now if I come in here, let's close that down. Let's close that down for now. This one thing, this custom button we have yet to define. So let's come over here. We're going to do the same thing. Let's just actually duplicate this. We'll call it custom button and open this up. Let's grab all those and say custom button. That should work. And let's see. In here, now we just want to have a button. Now you might remember we passed two items into this. If I come back over here, you can see what they are. Text and handle completed thing. So let's go ahead and add both of those over here. So here, this will be text, and this will be a handle completed thing. Perfect. And you'll notice that what I had to do is pass this in down from the app to now the one thing, and then from the one thing down to the custom button. So it's actually going down a couple levels. That's called prop drilling. You don't want to do this too much, but a couple levels deep is not a big deal. There are ways to handle this in React, but in a simple application like this should be just fine. I'm going to go ahead and close down the sidebar to give us a little bit more room. Now that we've got those in here, let me go ahead and save this, move over this way, and all I'm going to do is take the text and put it directly inside here. And again, to template stuff out in React, you're going to use these curly brackets. So now if I come over here and say like, hi, I'm going to get an error. What's going on? Let's come over here. Custom button is not defined. Well, you see I've got it here, but I never actually imported it, I don't think. Let me come back over here. And now what I need to do is say, let's do component imports. And I'll say import custom button from, this is a relative path, custom button like that. That should get rid of that error. Here we go. Now I can add hi, and I should have the button down below it, which I do. Cool. So what I need to do is let's get rid of this library import. We don't need that in this file. Let's come over here to the custom button and just style this a little bit, and then we're mostly on our way there. All right, now here we're going to have several things, so let's go ahead and space this out like we did in the other files. So we'll start with our class names. Here I'm going to have two items, so maybe let's get the HTML set first. This text is going to be inside a span, and this will have a closing tag like that. And I'm going to have a class on here of pointer events none to make sure I can't click on that. Instead, I'm clicking on the button itself. And then let's go ahead and actually have another icon. So we'll say check circle icon like that. And I'm going to pull this in here. And it's the same kind of thing, check circle icon. And I'll have a class on this. These class names, same thing here, class name will be, let's actually do the same thing. We'll do pointer events none so they can't click on that. And we'll do width 12 and height 12. That also reminds me, let's close this out, that I probably need on my form to do the same thing. So let's add pointer events none, even though I don't have any kind of event looking for the clicking on this button. I just want to make sure that I'm not clicking on that and having to handle that later. So I always like to add that when I can, so I can't click on an icon that doesn't need to be handled. All right, so back here, let's add a couple other things now to the actual button class itself. So we want these two items to be spaced out next to each other. So the easiest way to do that is with a flex. And we'll say items center, and then space x3. It's kind of like a gap before there was gap. And even though gap is supported in Flex now, it's just not awesome as far as its support level. So let's just leave it like that. I want the background color to be my teal of 600. I want it to be dark. Will be background teal of 500. And then left and right, let's give it some padding of 6. Up and down, padding of 3. I also want this to be rounded medium. The text itself to be a slate 200. And focus, I want there to be outline none. Focus visible, so when I've tabbed to it, I want there to be a ring of 4. That ring color should be teal 600. Again, if you don't want to type all this out, I get it. I figured this was easier than writing CSS. You can just copy this from the repo if you'd like. So I want my dark ring teal to be 500. Ring offset here, I also want it to be kind of a little bit away from the button to be 4. And that color ring offset will be slate of 200. For the dark, I want that to be a ring offset slate 800. And I want the hover to be an opacity of 80. And then finally, let's go ahead and transition on the opacity and set up a disabled state, because we're going to use that in a second here, to an opacity of 50. Opacity of 50. Okay, I think that's everything we need, except I do want to add a few other attributes. I want autofocus here as well so that it's ready to go. You can just click it off as soon as you want to. And we also want to handle the click. And again, we passed in this handle complete thing. So let's go ahead and do that. So when they click on this, we're going to pass this up a couple levels to the app component, which will then fire that function. Okay, so I think that should be all set. And if I save this and move over here, add it. Okay, that kind of worked. Let's see, background. Looks like this is text and this should be teal. And then this should be teal as well. Now the only thing we have left to do is then handle this event. So again, when I click on this, it's going to fire this function. This goes back up to its parent, which is the one thing right here. This handle completed thing goes back up to its parent, which is the app. So let's open that up. And then right here, it now fires this function. So what do I want to do inside of this function? First thing I want to do is take the e.target.set attribute, and I want to set the attribute of the button itself to disabled. So we'll say disabled is true. So now just to make sure that works, if I click on this, it should be disabled. And I might need to refresh. So let's try this again. Click, and it should be disabled. I think that's working. Handle completed thing. Is that what I passed down? Okay, so here's a problem. I never actually passed this down. Maybe you saw that already. So handle completed thing needs to be this. And now I think it should work. Yeah, there we go. So now it goes disabled. So you've got to actually prop drill if you're going to prop drill. So I'm going to pass this down to its child. It passes its child. And then when I click on it, all that should trace back up here. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to set that to disabled of true. Next, I want to actually get a different success message than this right here. And I'm just going to update this piece of state with some success message. So I'm going to say set thing, because that's my function up top here that's going to reset whatever this is piece of state contains. So I'll say set thing, and I'm going to pass this another custom function I'm going to write called get success message. So let's go ahead and do that. And then let's write this function. And let's see, it doesn't need to be inside the app, because one thing that happens inside an app is every time the app is shown, it's going to rerun all of this stuff. So all I want to do is come up here and say function get success message. That's not how you spell success. Get success message. How about like that? I'll pass it in here. And all I'm going to do is, let's see, we don't need to take anything in. I'm going to just have a bunch of different messages like that. And I'm going to go ahead and paste these in just for the sake of time, but they're just a bunch of dumb messages. All right, some are congratulatory, some are not. And then I'm going to return messages. And here what I want is the index. So let's do bracketed notation here of math.floor. And what I want is math.random. We're going to multiply it times messages.length. All right, so in other words, just give me a random index from here. So now if I do that, now it should actually update, let's see, down here, this thing, the state here, with whatever success message I want. So if I come back in here, add something here, let's see, click in here. Now if I click here, it should grab one of those, and it does. All right, cool. So we got that set. Now how do I get everything set back? Well, what I want to do is fire that little confetti, because I thought that would be kind of fun. So let's go ahead and do that. There's a library called JS Confetti. Here we go. All right, it's pretty simple and easy to use, so I'm going to go ahead and grab it here. Let's see, we've got to install it, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'll close stuff down here and say pm JS Confetti. That should install pretty quickly. And then let's see. Let's open this up. It should walk me through it. All right, so I can add it. Then all I have to do is basically import it. And let's grab all of this. And up above the app, let's restart this pm run dev. And close that down. Up above the app here, let's go ahead and say custom components. Let's say React or just libraries. Now there are actually React libraries here. We're just pulling in this vanilla JavaScript. This should work as well because JavaScript is valid React. So here I am. I've got all this set. Now all I have to do is basically call a new confetti. You can see right here, if I just say add confetti, it should work for me. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come down this way. And right after I've set a new success message, now I want to actually call that confetti. So I'll say JS confetti dot, and then it's add confetti. And at its most simple, if I just do that, come back over here, refresh. Let's see. I thought I started it. Guess not. All right, it just fires it right away. All right, so let's come in here, click this. Now it should click. All right, there we go. Now it's firing it right away every single time. Now if I come back over here, I'm actually adding the confetti up top, which I don't want to do. So when it first loads, it's doing it. I just want to do it when I click on the button, and there we go. Forget about it. Okay, so there's a couple other things we can do with that. We get back actually something from here. It passes back a promise. So we can do a little bit of a sync await here. So sync, and then what I'll do is just await this. We'll await the JS confetti, and after that has fired, then I'm going to go ahead and set this down here. We're going to remove the attribute of disabled to start with. And then what else do we need to do? We need to set our thing back to nothing if we're going to restart with a new message. And we need to set is completed back to true. All right, so now it's completed. And as soon as this is completed, you'll notice that this is going to actually now show the custom form and hide the one thing. That's what I want. So if I come back over here, let's go ahead and save this. Now I come over here and say, hi, one thing. I come over here and now I click. Don't you feel great? Once it disappears, then it will move past this async await. It fires something and says, hey, I'm done. And at this point, now we can reset everything back to normal. So here it is, this simple little project. Now there's one other thing we can pass into this Confetti, and that is some emojis. You might remember that from the opening demo. We just pass in inside of this object here emojis, and then I can pass in an array of emojis. So let's say something like, I don't know, the salute one, and what else did I have? I think like, let's do charts right here, and then maybe one more. Let's do a rocket. All right, there we go. So now this should fire all that. So if I say hi or whatever, I click that, forget about it. All right, perfect, and it fires all of those. So let's walk through this one more time, and then we'll call it good. So when I first load this and somebody requests this React application from the server, it's going to pass along a bundled JavaScript file. In fact, if I were to go ahead and build this, maybe I can show you what that looks like. So if I say pm run build, now it should build it, and it's going to spit it out in a dist folder. And if I come in here, you're going to see this dist folder here. It's got this index.html page, and all they're going to get back is this with some scripts and then an ID of root, a div with an ID of root. Now, all these scripts are going to reference different things in here. The CSS itself, this comes from Tailwind, and this JavaScript bundle is React, and then everything else that I've written. So all my custom things, you'll notice that all of this right here is quite a bit of JavaScript, but now it has everything it needs to dynamically generate this UI for the user. Now, what's going to happen is if I come in here, let's come over here and just kind of walk through this. In this app that's being dumped into that div, I've got several things going on here. When it actually fires this app itself here, it sets two pieces of state. It has a thing set to nothing to start with, and an is completed set to true. Then what it's going to do is within what it's returned, which is this JSX, kind of like JavaScript or like HTML, you'll see that it says if this state is completed true, go ahead and show this custom form component. Pass a bunch of props down to it so it can handle everything, pass some state down to it, and then what we're going to do is if it's not completed, then show this one thing. Again, pass something down to it and pass this down, which will prop drill all the way down to that button component. Now at that state, what I'm going to do is start to type. As I type, this handle input is going to be slowly updating from right here, the set thing to whatever I've typed into this. Now, there's one other thing we haven't added, which is if I were to click this ahead of time and try to enter, it's just going to say everything's done. We could add some kind of handle event for that. In fact, I might do that in the final project up on my site, but here we don't want to overcomplicate this. What's going to happen is as I type, it's actually updating that state live. And again, if I want to see that live, I can come over here and I can check it out. So I'll come inside here to these components and I can check that out. So here's the new state based on whatever this is. Now this is yelling at me because it's not actually connected anymore. But if I go ahead and mark it done, then it checks it off and then it throws all that up. When I click that button, it's going to fire this completed thing right here, which sets that attribute to disabled. It sets the thing to a new message based on whatever that function is that I passed in. It runs this JS Confetti script, and then after it's done, it returns its promised. Then we remove this disabled attribute, set the thing back to nothing, set is completed back to true, and we're off to the races. We can type in one more thing if we want to inside here. So all day long, you can just be marking stuff off. It jumps back here. You can just keep going, type in another thing over and over again to your heart's content, completing all kinds of stuff and enjoying yourself with some snarky messages to boot. Well, I hope that was a big help in understanding the basics of React. When I get around to doing that to-do list application with kind of the full CRUD functionality, I won't do quite as much explaining now that I have this as a basis, but I hope this was a help to you, especially if it's your first time. Let me know in the description what you're stuck on. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. And if you have any suggestions on how I could have done this better, please let me know in the comments. All right, I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.